Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Wealth Building for Dummies podcast. My name is Kyle Demian. I'm joined, as always, by Renji Matthew. And today we're going to be talking about retirement planning and how retirement actually works. For many people, retirement may seem very, very far off down the road. And for other people, retirement may be right around the corner. Today we're going to talk about how we as advisors actually help people plan their income for retirement, some different risks to watch out for, and then most importantly, how to optimize your retirement to make sure that you're going to be able to have your money last as long as you do. So, Renji, today we're talking about retirement, and why don't you start off by talking about the three stools of the three stools, the three-legged stool of retirement, and how most people tend to retire, and what different sources that they can pull income from, and kind of how that works. And let's start there for us.
Yeah, so the three stools would be a traditional retirement plan, one is Social Security, and your savings account. Um, I feel like nowadays there's multiple more stools on there, but that's how original when retirement was talked about the idea of retirement and the three things you can take money out of. That's what it was. It was traditional 401k or an IRA, your savings account, and Social Security.
Perfect. And one of the things we're going to be talking about later this week actually is how the Social Security is starting to crumble and that leg of the stool is starting to fall apart. We'll talk about that later this week and why that's a problem for people getting ready to retire. The second leg, which used to be for people, is that their employers used to offer them pensions. And as we talked about before, pensions are few and far between. So how, our parents or our grandparents retired is long in the past. And the traditional retirement strategies are starting to change. People can't rely upon pensions anymore, which was a guaranteed stream of income that you didn't have to worry about. And now Social Security was another, what seemed to be guaranteed stream of income in retirement, which is starting to crumble. And there's a lot of uncertainty around that too. And so now we're left with just the last leg of our three-legged stool of retirement, which would be up to us in our personal savings, right? Whether that's inside of a 401k, IRA, savings accounts, other investments. What most people don't realize or what they don't think about is, okay, when I get to retirement, how do I take my nest egg? How do I take all of my savings and how do I turn that into income, right? Because when we go to retire, we're still going to have monthly bills. We're still going to have utilities and insurance payments, right? We may or may not have a mortgage. We may or may not be renting, but we're still going to have a phone bill, internet bill, the Netflix subscription that we can't get rid of. We're going to have all these monthly bills, right? So we need to have monthly income. And if we're no longer working, we don't have a monthly income stream, right? That's why we have to turn our assets into monthly income when we go to retire. And now when we go to do that, the number one question you've got to ask and contemplate is, how do I take my assets? How do I turn it into income? But most importantly, how do I make sure I never run out of money? And that's what we're going to be talking about here today is the probably 4 or 5 top risks to be aware of in retirement. And we're going to talk about ways to help you solve those risks. So Renji, go ahead and start off with one of the most common risks to retirement. Provide a brief description about like what it means and maybe some different ways that we can solve for those and how people
Yeah,
can, improve their retirement around those as well.
yeah. One of the most common is market risk or market volatility, right? So, uh, everyone knows like if they have money in their 401k or any type of traditional retirement plan, or even money in the stock market, you have the stock market volatility, which means the market could go up and down every day, right? So the problem with that, we've talked about this on a previous podcast. One of the biggest problems with that is, let's use simple math. Let's say you have 100,000. If the market goes down 50%, you're at 50,000. If the market goes back up 50%, you're not back at 100, you're at 75,000, because it's 75 would be the 25 added to the 50,000 you have, right? So if you if you depend on a traditional 401k or even the stock market, you because of the volatility and the high risk, you never know what you're going to end up with. Yes, there's calculated calculations you can take, and with the calculated risk tolerances and everything like that, but it's all guesses, right? You don't actually know for sure what the market's going to do. Who's to say the market will do horrible for the next 10 years? Yes, it's highly unlikely that it's going to do that, because in the past, if you look at throughout the stock market history, it's only done 2 or 3 years in a 10-year period where the market ends up negative, right? So, which just means 7 to 8 years you're in the positive. So overall, you'll be in a better position. But just talking about going up and down in the market, you have to make more back up when you come back up to get back to what you were at before. So that's one of the biggest things, the market volatility risk that we want to talk about. Kyle, you want to take on to the next one?
Yeah, the next one is longevity risk. And longevity is simply how long are we going to live and making sure our assets last as long as we do, right? When we go to retirement, most people's idea of retirement is that they're only going to retire once, right? They don't want to have to do a retirement do-over, which means that you're going back to work to save up more money to retire again. Retirement should be a one-time only occurrence. And when we do that, we need to make sure that our assets and our money are going to last us as long as we do. And one of the ways to make sure that our money is going to last as long as we do is what's called the safe withdrawal rate, which has been a financial planning principle that's been around for decades that says that you can safely withdraw 4% of your saved up assets each and every year in retirement. By you withdrawing 4% of your assets, you should hypothetically never run out of money in retirement. You should be able to withstand any type of market. And we're going to talk about one of the last risks we're going to talk about, which should be the sequence of returns risk. We're going to actually share our screen and talk about the 4% rule, the safe withdrawal rate, and how the sequence of returns can drastically affect your retirement income. But for just this risk, longevity risk is about, how long are you going to live and how do we make your money last as long as we do? Renji, what's another common risk that people should be aware of for retirement?
Taxes. What was that quote? The two most guaranteed things in life are death and taxes, right?
Yep.
But yeah, taxes. We've again talked about this on previous podcasts. We don't know what taxes are going to be at your time of retirement because we've looked at the history of taxes and how back when in the late 60s, early 70s, that's when they came out with the traditional tax deferred accounts like 401ks and IRAs, because taxes at that time were in the 70 percentile. Man, I still can't imagine paying 70% of our income to taxes. You worked all that at hard work and only get to keep 30%. That's crazy, right? So, yeah, so that's why they made tax deferred accounts back then. Now, taxes are probably in one of the lowest percentage it's ever been in history. But like we talked about before, our national debt is 34 trillion and climbing. Only way to reduce that is by paying taxes. So when people talk about how taxes are going to be less later, I don't know what they're talking about. I feel like it's going to only be worse and worse as time goes on, because not just with their national debt, with inflation and all the other stuff coming up, and with Social Security crumbling, that just means they're going to take more and more taxes, right? So when you retire, let's say that's 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, whatever it is, you have no guarantee you know what the tax bracket's going to be at that time. Income tax brackets are changing almost yearly. You go in there and look, if you Google what income tax brackets were a year ago, 2 years ago, it might be different from what it is right now. So that's one example of you never know what tax bracket's going to be. So there's different types of taxes. There's so many different types of taxes out there. So that's one of the biggest risks. So that's why we talk about diversifying with tax deferred, tax free, buying assets. Like if you put all your eggs in one basket there, and you're not the only percent that controls how the outcome of that is, you're going to have a lot of doubts, especially when it comes to the government. You don't ever know what the government, what new rule they're going to come out with, what new law changes they're going to come out with. So you got to, that's why you want to diversify, because you don't want it to be, the outcome depend on other people, right? Um, I think if we talk about this could be a whole nother episode on the podcast, but yeah, taxes is a huge one. Kyle,
Absolutely.
you want to go to the next one, or did we cover all of them?
Yeah, the next one would be long-term care, or of
Yeah.
course, your health. Of course, anytime we're talking about, retirement planning, one of the things that we need to analyze or think about is the potential for the need of long-term care. And not sure if you watching this has ever looked into the costs of a nursing home, whether it's recently or in the past, but it's not cheap. And I just looked it up and was Googling it because I haven't looked it up in a while. And first article I came across said that the average or the median cost for a private room nursing home is about $9,000 a month. And that is expensive. And I'm looking it up. Yeah, annual costs are about $108,000 a year. So if you ever do end up in a nursing home, do you have the assets to be able to withstand a $100,000 a year expense? I think the average stay in a nursing home can range between about 2 to 3 years if you do end up there. And here's the thing, nursing homes are going to want their money, whether it's coming from you or your loved ones, your kids. Like if that ever happens, this needs to be part of your game plan, right? And where is that money going to come from? A lot of life insurance policies today actually have built in, some have long-term care riders, other ones have different riders that can help you in the event of a long-term care need. So life insurance can be a great benefit to this, or there's even standalone long-term care policies. But anytime we're talking about retirement and protecting your assets and making sure that the wealth that you've built up and saved, we want to make sure that stays within the family and is not going to the government. We don't want it to go to some nursing home. We want it to stay within inside of your family and be able to pass down to your loved ones and be able to leave a legacy, right? So long-term care needs to be a conversation, and that's one thing that you need to analyze. And then the last retirement risk for us that we need to talk about would be the sequence of returns risk. And to talk about that, I think it's very easy, or it's easier to grasp and understand the concept if we look at a chart and a graph on it. So I'm going to share my screen for this. And for those of you live on TikTok, obviously you won't be able to see my screen, but we're going to kind of walk through it. And Renji, do you want me to walk us through this, or do you want to take it over and walk us through it? It doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, either way is fine. I'm actually gonna see if I can show TikTok the what you're sharing.
There
Um,
we go.
I don't know if they can see it, but um, one of the things is eliminating market risk, like you see on the screen. If you can take away market risk, like we talked about, same example I used earlier about having the 100,000 in the market, and if the market goes down 50% and comes back up, you're only at 75,000, right? But imagine if you could eliminate that risk. When you start at 100, if the market goes down 50%, you're still at 100. Now, if the market comes up 50%, you're at 150, and that's just 1 year. So imagine compounding over 10 years or more, how much more money you're going to have in a secure account like that. Um, Go ahead, Kyle, if they want to add something.
Yeah. For sure. And with that, this is called the sequence of returns risk, where it's the risk that involves the order in which the investment returns occur. So in an investment portfolio over time, you might have a very favorable average annual return. But if a retiree experiences too many negative returns in such a short period of time, while also withdrawing those funds to live off of in retirement, you could actually run out of money in retirement. And to show you and kind of compare and contrast that, let me zoom in. It doesn't look like it wants to zoom in for us too well. But this chart, if you can see, I'm going to break it down. It talks about Mr. Smith and Miss Jones, how they both have $100,000 in said account, right? If you see here, they are diversified. Some of it's in stocks, some of it is in bonds. They have the exact same diversification. And then in really small print here, they're taking out annual withdrawals of 5%. So they're doing 5% withdrawals for $5,000 a year of income. And right, if you remember, we talked about the safe withdrawal rate earlier, which was 4%. So they are being a little aggressive in taking out 5%, which is a common thing that I've ran into before, Renji. People think that 4% versus 5% withdrawals may not make a difference in your retirement portfolio. But as we're going to see here, Mr. Smith is actually going to run out of money and exhaust his account, despite over the course of this 30-year time frame, he's going to have a higher average rate of return than Miss Jones is going to have. You can see he averages 10.5%, while Miss Jones only averages 9.6% rates of returns. But after 30 years in retirement, he has no money left, and Miss Jones still has $591,000 in her account, right? So let's take a step back before we look at the numbers. How can Mr. Smith average a greater rate of return over 30 years, but he runs out of money, while Miss Jones has less return, but she still has $600,000 where she started with $100,000, right? And this is exactly what we're talking about. This is the sequence of returns risk. The only difference that you see here, Mr. Smith retired in 1969, while Miss Jones retires in 1979. That is the only difference. They retired at the exact same age, just Mr. Smith was 10 years earlier. So what happens, and these are using the actual rates of returns from these given years in retirement. Okay, so we're using historical returns. You've probably heard of the saying, history tends to repeat itself. It may not be identical, but it'll probably rhyme. It'll probably be similar, right? So we're using historical rates of returns. Mr. Smith, when he starts off in retirement, taking out 5% a year, you can see the market goes down the first year, 2%. 1970, he returns 5. 1971 returns 10%. 1972, market's up 12%. 1973, market's down 6.6. 1974, market's down 12%. But in 1975, 1976, the market comes back. He's up 25%, 16%. His account isn't doing too bad, right? But in regards to the impact that losses have on your retirement account that's needed to get back to your break-even point, you can see he starts off with $100,000, and over time, it just starts slowly dwindling away. Because remember, he's still taking out $5,000 a year of income, right? And 20 years into retirement, his retirement account at age 85 would be exhausted. He has no more income in retirement when he originally started with $100,000. Now, for some people, if this happens, what does this mean for you? 20 years into retirement, this means that you're either trying to get another job at age 85 or you're living with your children, right? If you have children, but you're moving in to live with your child at this time. Miss Jones doesn't do anything different. She has the same exact portfolio balance. She's taking out the same amount of income every year. The only difference is the fact that she doesn't experience any declines in her account over the first 20 years. She earns 14%, 23, 7, 16, 16, 7, 22%, 13%, 5, 12, 22, 1, 20. The first decline she actually takes isn't until the year 2000, where the market would be down just about 1% in her retirement account with her investments split up like this. So she has a really good runway of 20 to almost 25 years of not taking any losses, right? And with that, because she's never going backwards, 30 years into retirement, she's been taking out her 5% a year of withdrawals, and she's got $600,000 saved up inside of this account. Miss Jones didn't do anything different than Mr. Smith. The only difference is Miss Jones wasn't experiencing some of these losses that Mr. Smith experienced earlier on in his retirement, right? So taking a step back, looking at this and understanding what sequence of returns risk is, this tells us how important it is to remove the possibility that you have these large hits inside of your retirement accounts when you go to retire, right? And the unique thing is, like, this talks about 1979 all the way up to 2008, and everybody knows, I think, what happened in 2008, where the market was down 40%, right? In her portfolio, where it was properly diversified, I would say, she only took a 20% hit. So you can already see, by having proper diversification in retirement, instead of her losing 40% in 2008, she would have only lost 20%, right? But this even goes deeper into a conversation, which would probably lead to another podcast, which actually we filmed just the other day, talking about different retirement options to give you market-like returns without the market risk. Because when you enter retirement, your investing strategy needs to change. When you're saving for retirement and saving for your future, just trying to build the largest nest egg possible, that is totally different planning that's required compared to you being at retirement and needing to mitigate and minimize as many risks as you can, especially when it pertains to the market. Right? In 2008, the market was down nearly 40%. In 2022, the market was down about 20%. And when you go to retire, if you have that 20% loss occur in year one, plus you're taking income out of it, you're setting yourself up to have potentially not as great of a retirement as you may have wanted. So what can you do to protect from that? Renji, what are some different ideas? Obviously people can diversify, but kind of talk about some different ideas for people to protect their money from the market and to make sure that they're not, like Mr. Smith, running out of money maybe 20 years into retirement.
Yeah, one of the things we talked about on a previous episode was when you get closer to that retirement age, you want to put at least 50% of your assets into secure accounts. We talked about there are IRAs out there with the floors, kind of like the fixed index annuities and the pension plans like they worked in the past, So you have that guaranteed protection so that, like Miss Jones in that example, if you diversify and you don't have to put all your money in one account. If you diversify in different accounts and have those secure accounts as 50% at least of your portfolio, now when the market goes down, at least 50% of your assets are protected from that market downturn. So you're not wiped out completely. And that's why you saw in that example, she only lost 20% in 2008 when the market actually did negative 40 because she had it diversified. So that's one of the best ways. And then we've also, we love talking about passive income. The benefit of doing passive income is you don't have to worry about any of this, right? If you have passive income coming your way every month, month after month, no matter what the government does or what the market does, depending on your passive income, whatever industry it's in, you're continuing to have that even in retirement. So that's why we push on passive income. But if you like the traditional retirement route, splitting your portfolio up where you have at least half of your portfolio in retirement in these secure protected accounts is going to help you with that longevity, where, because we talk to so many people that are either having to go back to work because they ran out of their retirement income, or they're having to work longer than they expected because they don't have enough saved up, because they're thinking about retiring and then the market goes crazy, right? So, and I think we've talked about this too. One of the biggest, 2 years ago, or 2022, in the beginning of the year, the market went down about 20%. And in that time, I was talking to so many people that happened to. They were actually going to retire that year, but they decided to work another 2 or 3 years. But the problem is, there's no guarantee that the market won't go down again in those 2 or 3 years, right? But
Absolutely.
if you split your portfolio where you have at least 50% in these protected accounts, then there's a guarantee that you will not lose money in those accounts. And if you decide to retire, you can still retire. And if the market does great, then hey, more money to retire with, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's all I'm going to say there because I could keep going on and on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And with that, just one more thing to branch off on what Renji said was retirement income planning and figuring out your retirement, making sure you have the most successful retirement possible. You really got to ask yourself and contemplate, would you rather have your retirement focused on guarantees and having guaranteed protection, guaranteed income, or would you rather have your retirement be based on risks and having risk of, oh, what if the market crashes? How is that going to impact my potential to be able to retire for the next, 20, 30 years? Right. And then lastly, one of the common questions I tend to see and hear and get in my conversations with people is like, how do I know what to protect in retirement and what's right for me? Short answer is it is going to depend on everybody, depend on your level of assets, right? If you have less assets to work with rather than, maybe more than you need, obviously you can take less, you would want to take less risk just to make sure you have more guarantees if you don't have as many assets. If you have more, maybe you can still be risky. But just the general rule of thumb, one of the general rules of thumb that people follow in traditional financial planning is take your age, and that is what percent of your portfolio should be out of risk, should be in safe retirement accounts. So if you're 58 years old, you should have maybe about 58% of your portfolio protected from the market. If you're 71, you should have about 71% of your portfolio protected from the market. And like I said, that's just a rough rule of thumb. If you're more aggressive or more conservative, obviously you kind of balance that number as you see fit. But that is a general idea of how you yourself could kind of figure it out if you wanted just to do it yourself. Or of course, if you're looking for, expert or professional guidance, Renji and I help people with retirement income planning, every day. That is one of the avenues that we help people with inside of our financial services business. And we're here to help with that. Right. So with that, Renji, anything else that you want to wrap us up with for today on our show?
Not really. I think you covered it. I think you ended it a good way. I guess the only
Perfect.
thing I would say is think about what's best for your family. Think about what legacy you're going to leave, no matter what you choose, which would be more beneficial for them. And if you don't care about them, at least think about how you're going to leave retirement, right? But yeah, I think those are all some of the things that we need to be thinking about all the time because if you have a family, hey, how are you going to leave a legacy when you're gone? And if you don't have a family and you don't have anyone to leave money to, how do you want to enjoy the rest of your life, retirement wise and stuff like that? So some of the questions you want to think about and answer for yourself, even if you don't answer it to anyone else, at least to yourself, so you know what your plan is for the future.
Absolutely. I love it. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of the Wealth Building for Dummies podcast YouTube show. And until next time, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And we'll see you guys on the next episode. Take care.